Ascalon and brought the army to Gaza, where they were joined by the Knights Templar. On November 25th, they tracked down the Sultan and his main army that had reached the hill of Montgizard, or Tel Jazar. Saladin's army was still widely dispersed and pillaging the surrounding land, and he could only recall the ones who were still within earshot. Consequently, he lost the advantage of overwhelmingly superior numbers, though he still had a larger force than the Franks, whose army consisted of 375 knights and a few thousand infantry. What the Saracens also failed to realize was they had been carefully maneuvered onto swampy ground, where superior numbers acted against them. The local knowledge of the ground is likely attributed to Lord Iblis. As Baldwin's army looked upon Saladin's, the king summoned the Bishop of Bethlehem to ride forward. The Crusaders had with them their most precious relic, the true cross believed to be wood, from the very cross of Jesus, carried by the bishop. The king, whose teenage body was already ravaged by aggressive leprosy, was helped from his horse and dropped to his knees before the cross. He prayed to God for victory and rose to his feet to cheers from his men, who were moved and deeply inspired by what they had just witnessed.
Jerusalem.
Forming for battle, Baldwin, Reynald's knights, and the Templars, even though numerically inferior, executed a full frontal heavy-armored cavalry charge at the center of Saladin's hurriedly formed battle lines, immediately inflicting heavy casualties. The impact was immediate and devastating, creating a wedge breaking the enemy formation. Saladin's troops were spread out over a large area. He was trying to organize them into 3 or 4 blocks around the hill, and Reynald surprised him with a charge. A common tactic was to allow the Crusaders to charge, then maneuver the troops out of the way to almost let them pass through, but then surround and trap them. Saladin could have been planning to do that. Unfortunately for him, Reynald charged unexpectedly before Saladin had put all his remaining troops where he needed them. Saladin's army simply lost their formation, and the Crusader army chased them. One of Saladin's great nephews was killed, and Saladin himself was nearly killed, but he managed to escape, mounting a racing camel and rushing away to safety with only a few companions. Crusaders chased down the fleeing enemy, killed or captured as many of them as they could, and also captured a large amount of booty. The Muslim troops that had previously wandered off to plunder the land were also easily captured when they tried to return. The pursuit lasted into the night. Hundreds of the remnants of Saladin's army captured by the Crusaders, who were surveying the area, uninterested in forgiveness. Baldwin pursued Saladin until nightfall, and then retired to Ascalon. Deluged by 10 days of heavy rains, and suffering the loss of his army, including his personal bodyguard of Mamluks, Saladin fled back to Egypt, harassed by Bedouins along the way. Only 1/10 of his army made it back to Egypt with him.
I am Jerusalem.
Bitch, drop like flies in this bitch. All good times in your face.
I am Jerusalem. And you, Reynald, will give me the kiss of peace.
The year of the icon that he is today. When only a child, he was diagnosed with leprosy, but his condition didn't hold him back. He was noted as having a sharp mind and being highly skilled at riding horses. The young Baldwin became king at the age of 13, and at the age of 16, he went into battle against one of the greatest warriors of the age, the Sultan of Egypt, Saladin. The odds were stacked against him. Heavily outnumbered, the teenage king knelt before the true cross, exalting his men before the battle began. The Crusader army swiftly charged at the Saracen ranks, catching them completely off guard and leading to an unexpected rout of Saladin's army. Despite his crippling illness, the leper king led from the front, fighting alongside his men in the thick of the battle. Only a tiny portion of the enemy army remained, and Saladin was sent scurrying off to Egypt on a camel. Baldwin was in the end a tragic hero. He died at the age of 24, and once gone, Saladin defeated the Crusaders and captured Jerusalem.
I am Jerusalem. And you, Reynold, will give me the kiss of peace. I am Jerusalem.
Forming for battle, Baldwin, Reynold's knights, and the Templars, even though numerically inferior, executed a full frontal heavy armored cavalry charge.
Chroniclers theorized that the Ayyubid supplies had been delayed at a river crossing. And it is said that the army of Saladin may have been taken by surprise due to these circumstances. Other sources assume that Saladin had simply underestimated King Baldwin because of his young age and deathly illness. Whatever the case, the young leper king had gotten the better of his wiser, older opponent. It is said that King Baldwin IV ordered the relic of the true cross to be raised in front of the opposing troops. The king, whose teenage body was already ravaged by aggressive leprosy, was helped from his horse and dropped to his knees before the cross. Sources say he prayed to God for victory and rose to his feet to cheers from his men, moved by what they had just witnessed.
On this day, become the man you were born to be. You have it within yourself to write your own legends. Let it be to death or victory.
Though Baldwin was very ill and could barely ride his horse, he decided it was too late to turn back, and so led the attack. The Christian heavy cavalry, the Knights, and Knights Templar led a shock charge directly into Saladin's force. The attack fell upon a disorganized and ill-prepared Ayyubid army, causing immense destruction. The heavy Christian knights had pierced directly through the center of Saladin's force, separating his formation straight down the middle and splitting their cohesion.
As Saladin's forces advanced, Baldwin IV and his advisors realized that allowing Ashkelon to fall unchallenged would be catastrophic. However, the Crusader army was vastly outnumbered and lacked the necessary strength for a direct engagement. Faced with imminent danger, Baldwin IV made a bold decision. Rather than await a siege at Ashkelon or Jerusalem, he chose to confront the Muslim army directly in open battle. Recognizing the challenge of engaging a numerically superior force, Baldwin relied on swift maneuvers and surprise offenses to shift the odds in his favor. Summoning all available knights, including remnants of the crusading nobility and military orders, Baldwin urgently rallied his forces. Although still vastly outnumbered by Saladin's troops, the young king was resolute in his determination to fight. The Christian prospects, initially grim, improved with the arrival of the Knights Templar. Led by Grand Master Arnold of Toroja, the Templars brought not only additional warriors, but also crucial expertise in combating Muslim forces. The Crusader army, numbering fewer than 4,000, prepared to face an Islamic force exceeding 20,000 troops. Baldwin and Arnold of Troja devised an audacious strategy. Exploiting the exhaustion of Saladin's army, they would launch a decisive assault when the enemy was at its weakest. Selecting advantageous terrain was key to neutralizing Saladin's numerical superiority. The Ayyubid forces, fatigued after a grueling march under the relentless Palestinian sun, found themselves in a region where cavalry maneuvers were restricted by hills and uneven ground. This terrain limitation hindered the effectiveness of Saladin's mounted archers, granting the Crusader heavy cavalry an edge in close combat. Days of arduous marching had drained Saladin's troops, leaving them short on water and provisions, significantly weakening their combat effectiveness. Recognizing this vulnerability, Baldwin seized the opportunity for a surprise attack. Instead of waiting defensively, he ordered a rapid and aggressive charge against the Muslim army. Well-positioned Crusader forces struck with full force, catching the enemy off guard and throwing them into chaos. Baldwin's troops were meticulously arranged to maximize their assault's impact. Heavy cavalry spearheaded the attack, with infantry and archers providing critical support. The Crusaders' well-coordinated onslaught shattered the disorganized Ayyubid lines before they could regroup.
But the mind of a general. November 25th, 1177. The scent of iron and sweat hung thick as Saladin's war machine, 26,000 strong, marched toward Jerusalem. And standing in their path, a teenage king wrapped in bandages, commanding just 375 knights and a prayer. Sudden silence, then whispered. Baldwin IV was dying, but not today. With his hands bound to prevent his rotting fingers from slipping, the leper king did the unthinkable. He ordered a full cavalry charge directly into Saladin's center. The Saracens gasped as this wraith-like figure led from the front, his silver cross gleaming through the dust. They say the Nile ran red that day. When the slaughter ended, Saladin's mighty army was annihilated. Barely a tenth survived. The Sultan himself escaped only by riding a racing camel through the night. At 16, Baldwin had achieved what veteran commanders couldn't. His victory at Montcassar became legend. The day god smiled on the leper, but in the shadows, Baldwin's bandages soaked through with fresh blood. The greatest threat to Jerusalem wasn't Saladin's armies, but time itself. For now, though, the kingdom breathed easier. The boy king had become the shield of Jerusalem. Victory at Montcassar bought Baldwin time, but not peace, as his body failed. The Real battle moved from the desert to the throne room.
An important part of his host was away, raiding and foraging, and another contingent had been left guarding the baggage train. If we consider Salah ad-Din intended to conquer Jerusalem and had disregarded Baldwin's army as a threat, we can assume a number over 10,000, probably closer to 15,000 men. However it may be, King Baldwin managed to dismount his horse in spite of his illness before the true cross and prayed to God for victory. With the morale of his men bolstered, the King of Jerusalem led the attack himself. first clashed heavily impacted the Ayyubid army, which was still not entirely in position. The young King Baldwin was in the thick of the fighting, and his retinue fought valiantly. The chroniclers describe his charge as follows. The young king, stricken with leprosy, overcame all obstacles and fought with great courage, which also gave courage to his men. Meanwhile, Salahuddin sent messengers to the raiding parties he had dispatched earlier, so this man would return and join him. The forces that had been foraging were, in fact, returning, but the Christian rearguard seemed to pick them off in small groups before they could join the Ayyubid front lines. Now, if you're enjoying the video so far, a flanking maneuver so as to turn the tides of the battle, but the horses were exhausted from the unusually long march from Egypt. This effort would not succeed. Frustrated but not beaten, the Sultan then resorted to arranging the arriving raiding troops for a counterattack. The forces that were away at the start of the battle were amassing in one of the flanks of the Ayyubid army. Salahuddin spurred his horse towards them. From the other side of the battlefield, Templar Grand Master Or de Saint-Amand noticed the bulk of unorganized men gathering where the Sultan was heading, and his reserve of heavy-mounted knights pushed forward in a powerful charge. The Sultan's Mamluk guard faced the mighty Templars, but the knights cut many of them down. Ralph of Dees, an eyewitness, describes the dreadful clash as follows. Sparring all together, as one man, they made a charge, turning neither to the left nor to the right. Recognizing the battalion in which Saladin commanded many knights, they manfully approached it, immediately penetrated it, incessantly knocked down, scattered, struck and crushed. Saladin was smitten with admiration, seeing his men dispersed everywhere turned in flight, everywhere given to the mouth of the sword. Indeed, the Templar charge towards Salahuddin's division decisively crushed the Ayyubid cohesion.
You play? The whole world is in chess. Any move can be the death of you. Do anything except remain where you started. Not be sure of your end. Were you sure of your end once? I wasn't. What was it? To be buried 100 yards from where I was born. Now I sit in Jerusalem and look upon a king. When I was 16, I won a great victory. I felt in that moment I was a good man. Now I know after what two-thirds. None of us know what hand the Bible said. King may move a man, a father may claim a son. That man can also move himself. Only then is that man truly begin his own game. Remember that whatsoever you are played by whom, your soul is in your keeping alone. Even though those who presume to play you be kings or men of power, when you stand before God, you cannot say that I was told by others to do thus, or that virtue was not convenient, the time was not suffice. Remember that.
In Syria, Jerusalem was almost defenseless. Saladin knew this. He was so confident. He let his men rest along the way, split his forces to pillage the countryside. He believed there was no one left strong enough to stop him. But Saladin was wrong. In the ancient city of Ascalon, a sickly teenager was being wrapped in bandages by knights and gently lifted onto his horse. His eyes burned with light. Behind the veil, his left hand held a sword. His right arm was already paralyzed. This was Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem, just 16 years old. At his side, only a few hundred knights. Some from Ramla, others the Templars. None were stronger than Saladin, none were more numerous, but they all carried one thing, faith, and before them they raised the most sacred relic of all, the true cross, a fragment of the very wood from Christ's crucifixion. When Grand Master Odo of the Templars cried, "Oh, for God!" that tiny army ignited like a flame from heaven. November 25th, on the road between Ramla and Jerusalem, Saladin was leading his troops through a narrow valley. His army was stretched, divided, not yet in formation, and then it happened. The thunder of hooves roared from the cliffs above. "Crasher!" The Crusaders charged, falling like an avalanche into the gorge. Saladin had no time, no commands, no preparation. The wrath of the cross descended on him like the flames of hell. They say Baldwin IV couldn't even sit upright, but he rode, he lifted his sword, he led the charge like a ghost of holy vengeance. He said nothing, only motioned, and plunged straight into Saladin's army. The battle raged through the afternoon. Blood rained onto the sand. Muslim horses fled in terror. Pillagers became prey. Fled in terror. Pillagers became prey. Saladin was nearly captured. He escaped only by mounting his fastest camel and fleeing into the desert. And Baldwin, though his body shook from pain, did not retreat. He ordered the pursuit. He stood in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by blood and corpses. Montgisar, just a name, until that day. From then on, it became legend. A tiny army, just a few hundred, shattered one of the strongest forces in the known world. A teenager with leprosy stopped an empire, a victory no one dared to dream. No one thought was possible. But it happened. For faith. For Jerusalem. For a king who refused to die in bed. From that day on, Saladin, a man who had never known defeat, carried one name with him, even into his dreams. Baldwin IV, the undefeated leper king of Jerusalem. After the crushing defeat at Montgisar, Saladin withdrew his army to Egypt. He did not cry. He did not scream. He said nothing, and began preparing for something. that none of his enemies ever lived to see twice a counter-strike. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Baldwin IV still wore the crown. Still, they called him king. But with every passing day, his body was decaying. The leprosy crept from his hands into his joints, up to his face. No one dared look into his eyes too long. No one dared shake his hand, not out of fear, but out of sorrow. And yet, it was Baldwin himself who never pitied his own fate. He knew Saladin would return, and when he did, he would come with the force of a desert storm. So, amid festering wounds and relentless pain, Baldwin made a decision to build a new fortress. Its name was Jacob's Ford on the Jordan River between Syria and Galilee. A thorn shoved straight into the throat of the Islamic Empire. Saladin understood this. He sent envoys to Jerusalem, offering 60,000 dinars, just to make Baldwin stop. The leper king refused. Saladin raised the offer to 100,000. Baldwin still shook his head. Nothing could buy his will to defend the holy city. And so, war began again. June 1179, at Marj Ayun, Saladin struck back without warning. The Frankish army, fresh from a small victory, was resting, collecting spoils. No formation, no defenses. Saladin descended like fire from the mountains. Odo, Grand Master of the Templars, was killed. Many nobles captured. Baldwin, now too weak to ride, had to be carried off the field by his knights in a whirlwind of chaos, from the glory of Montgisar to a stretcher carried by 4 men, his vision blurred, his arm useless, his skin rotted so deeply that even the lightest touch made him cry out in pain. But Saladin didn't wait. He marched his full army to Jacob's Ford, and in just 5 days the fortress fell. The soldiers inside, even those who surrendered, were butchered or sold into slavery. Jerusalem had lost its northern defense. Hope began to collapse. Villages near Galilee evacuated in panic. Baldwin could barely even hold a sword. And yet, he still returned to the field, blind in one eye, unable to sit upright, no longer able to eat solid food, surviving only on liquids. His legs were so deformed. His attendants had to bind his knees with wood and leather to keep the bones from breaking. Still, he gave orders. Still, he received diplomats. Still, he prepared for a final confrontation that everyone thought was suicide, because Baldwin knew the truth. Saladin had been reborn. His new army was even larger than at Montgisard. And this time, he wouldn't retreat. There was only one goal now, the holy city, Jerusalem, and only one question remained. Can a man who can no longer stand stop the war horses of a god of war? The year was 1183. The mighty fortress of Kerak stood tall amid the desert of Moab, a bastion dividing Syria and Egypt. The only lifeline for Saladin's armies to move troops and supplies. To hold Kerak was to split the Muslim empire in half, and the man who held it was none other than Reynald de Chatillon, Baldwin's most trusted, yet most reckless ally. But Reynold was a wild man. He cared nothing for treaties, respected no oaths. And this time, he shattered the truce by attacking a Muslim caravan during the holy month of Hajj. Among the travelers was Saladin's own sister. It was the final straw. Saladin swore before Allah he would burn Kerak to the ground and erase Reynold's name from the maps of the Holy Land. In November of that year, 30,000 Muslim troops marched upon Kerak. War drums thundered across the valley. Giant catapults were assembled. Flaming arrows lit up the night sky like falling stars. Inside the fortress, a wedding was underway. The son of a Frankish noble was marrying Reynold's daughter. The bride was crying. The mother clutched her child. Guests screamed in the shelters below. The chants of the Quran echoed with the cries of terrified children. Kerak had become hell, and just as everyone knelt in desperate prayer, a message struck the gate like lightning. "The king is coming!" Baldwin IV. By now, he was completely blind. His limbs twisted and mauled by disease. He had to be tied to a stretcher with leather and bronze cords. And still, he led an army to rescue Kerak. No one believed it, until a tiny force appeared on the horizon. Through the desert haze, the cross banner flapped in the wind, and there, on a stretcher among the lights, was a body that no longer looked alive, but the dry eyes still burned with unbreakable will. When Saladin heard the news, he was stunned, not afraid, but speechless, a king on the brink of death, without hands, without feet, unable even to speak clearly, had returned to the battlefield. Saladin gave the order, retreat. The siege of Kerak ended, without a single sword being drawn. They say, when Baldwin reached the gates of the fortress, the people wept. The guards threw down flags in gratitude. The bride, once sure she would die on her wedding day, knelt at the king's stretcher and whispered, "God sent you. You didn't die." The kingdom still stands, and Baldwin just nodded. He said nothing, but the effort took its toll. Returning from the field, his health collapsed. His bones began to bleed through the skin. Doctors were helpless. Priests began preparing for the funeral, but Baldwin refused to die because he knew, before he met death, he had one last task: to pass the crown to someone worthy. The year was 1184. Baldwin IV was no longer a king. He was a living corpse, wrapped in linen, soaked in herbs, and hoisted upright every morning with bronze chains, just to keep his body from falling apart. But Jerusalem still needed him, and because of that, he was not yet allowed to die. Baldwin knew he could no longer ride into battle, but he still had his mind, and one final task: to choose his successor. The enemies at Jerusalem's gates were not the only threat. Inside the city, noble factions had begun to emerge, each one clawing for power, each one wanting their man on the throne, and the most dangerous among them was Guy de Lusignan. Guy, handsome, young, husband of Sibylla, Baldwin's sister, a French noble who had never spilled blood for the Holy Land. but whose ambition knew no end. While Baldwin lay paralyzed in bed, Guy began issuing orders. He summoned soldiers, punished towns that defied him. He nearly started a war with the Kingdom of Tripoli, Baldwin's oldest ally. From his deathbed, Baldwin screamed in silence. He could not yell, could not rise, but inside him, the fire still burned. And so, for the last time, Baldwin gave a king's command. Strip Guy of his rights. A royal edict was issued. Guy de Lusignan was removed from the line of succession, and the crown was placed instead on the head of a child not yet 6 years old. Prince Baldwin V, the son of Sibylla and her first husband, a child, to inherit the crown of a dying man. No one believed the boy would survive the winter, but Baldwin IV did it anyway, because he knew better a child without sin than a traitor on the throne of the holy city. But the race against death was ending. The leprosy had reached his heart. Baldwin could no longer see the sun. Every breath bled through his nose. His teeth were gone. He could no longer chew food. And yet, every day, he forced himself to rise, to sign documents, to direct his generals, to keep Jerusalem from collapsing. Then, on a cold morning, early in the year 1185, his servants found him lying still. No breath, no pain, just a smile. Baldwin IV, the leper king, was gone at the age of 24. No grand funeral, no army marching behind his coffin, only a handful of loyal knights, and the people of Jerusalem weeping in silence. They buried him in the church of the Holy Sepulchre, the same place where he once knelt before the true cross, on the eve of Montgisart, and on his tombstone they carved just one line: a warrior of God, a king who never surrendered. But the death of Baldwin IV was not the end. It was the beginning, because the man he once warned about, Guy de Lusignan, was waiting in the shadows, and Saladin would return with a bigger army, a fiercer vengeance, and a single purpose: to reclaim Jerusalem. Jerusalem, just 2 years after Baldwin IV died. His kingdom collapsed. Why? Not because the Muslim armies were stronger, not because God turned his face away, but because of one man, Guy de Lusignan, the same man Baldwin had stripped of power, had seized the throne. Thanks to the palace coup orchestrated by his wife, Sibylla, and the moment he became king, Guy tore up the peace treaties with Saladin. He gave full military control to Reynald de Chatillon, the man who once enraged Saladin by insulting his sister. Reynald didn't wait. He attacked a Muslim caravan near Kerak, slaughtered the merchants, took prisons, and killed even the young child of Saladin's sister. This time, Saladin would show no mercy. He swore, "I will not rest until Jerusalem kneels at my feet." May 1187, Saladin mobilized his forces from Syria to Egypt. 50,000 troops, war horses, camels, elephants, all marching north toward the heart of Christendom. Guy, Reynald, the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the remaining Crusader knights gathered at the fortress of Sephari. There, they faced a choice: Stay and defend the water supply. Wait for Saladin's supplies to run dry, or leave the water behind. And march to relieve Tiberias under siege. Veteran commanders urged, stay. But Guy chose to march, out of pride, out of ego. And under Reynald's whispering tongue, July 2nd, 1187, the Crusaders marched under 45 degrees Celsius desert heat through waterless hills, and Saladin was waiting. He set fire to the fields ahead, letting flames and smoke roll towards the Crusaders. Soldiers collapsed in thirst. Horses died mid-trek. Even the tents caught fire. Morning of July 4th, the Battle of Hattin began. Saladin surrounded the Crusaders between two volcanic hills. No water, no escape, no reinforcements. Inside the circle, Guy ordered a desperate charge. Reynald led the cavalry straight into the Muslim line. They were all slaughtered. Saladin tightened the noose. He burned more grass, unleashed volleys of flaming arrows, smoked out the Crusaders. They couldn't see. They couldn't breathe. They couldn't flee that afternoon. The army of Jerusalem was destroyed. More than 20,000 men lay dead. The Templars beheaded one by one. Guy de Lusignan captured alive. Reynald brought before Saladin himself. Saladin drew his own blade and beheaded him with his own hand. He spoke, I swore I would kill you myself, and Allah has granted me the chance. The cross fell. The true cross, sacred relic of Christianity, was seized by Saladin, and Jerusalem was left unguarded. October 1187, Saladin marched on the holy city. No Baldwin, no reinforcements, no miracle. Only citizens, trembling in churches, nuns holding hands and praying. They now lay buried in dust and ash. But the story didn't end there. After the defeat at Hattin, all of Europe awoke. The great kings, Richard the Lionheart, Frederick Barbarossa, Philip Augustus, drew their swords and swore to march, not just to reclaim land, but to reclaim honor for a man who fought with only half a body, but carried in his chest a heart twice the size of the world.
While Baldwin was on the throne despite his illness, the kingdom lost no territory, and it flourished. Ruling as king was probably an unbearable burden for him because of his leprosy. The story of Baldwin IV is a tragic story of a truly great leader, and we can only imagine what the kingdom of Jerusalem would have looked like if Baldwin had lived a full, healthy life.